Hello, folks. Welcome back to a new week on World War II TV. And it's been a few years, 4 apparently, since Richard Duckett graced our World War II TV screens. But he's back to talk about his latest book, Jungle Warrior. Links to purchase it are in the description below, or you can find it at your favorite bookstore or wherever you buy your books. But today he is joined by a special guest. I'll bring everybody in. And good evening, Rich. How are you?
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Enjoying the weather.
And
great.
You have a special guest. So I know it says it in the description, but I will let you introduce your special guest.
Okay, I am with the Jungle Warrior's grandson, Duncan.
So we have that little bit of extra insight there. We all, and it's always good when you get that family connection, because you get the context of why a figure is important in terms of the broad scheme of history. Then you get that connection there with someone, and that's what we brought you on for. So Rich, we've got your slides there, folks. We'll kind of do, if there's questions about any of the information that's on screen, we'll do them as we go along. But if there's any kind of broader questions about the Burma campaign or SOE or Duncan's grandfather on kind of a post-war career or something like that, we'll do them maybe at the end. But I'm going to hand over to Rich and Duncan to take us through this Jungle Warrior. So let's look at the SOE, Burma, and the importance of your grandfather, Duncan.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to work on this book. It's been a fantastic journey working with Duncan, and having access to all of the family archives has really enriched this book and made a hell of a difference. And hopefully some of that will come through the screens tonight for you all.
And that's your website there for as well, to remind people if they want to get more information. And there's obviously lots and lots of information there that you can't quite squeeze in the book. So note that for later on, folks.
Yeah, thank you. I've called tonight's talk Another Lost Warrior because back in 2017, Philip Davies wrote a book about Seagram and Pagani, and he called it Lost Warriors. So perhaps this is another lost warrior. He's certainly a jungle warrior. He's Lieutenant Colonel Edgar Peacock. He won a DSO, an MC, and a bar, all for what he did in Burma. And tonight, we're going to try and justify our Britain's greatest SOE commander epithet that we've given him. We think it's thoroughly deserving, of course. And our job tonight is to convince you. So where we're going to take you tonight, we're going to do a bit of a background. Duncan's going to take you through the early life and Peacock's war before Burma. And then we've got a roller coaster of 10 reasons why he deserves the epithet that we're talking about. And then we'll have any concluding remarks. So that's where we're going. The picture there is of Edgar as a new sergeant in October 1940. And that's where Duncan's going to pick up the story for you.
Okay, well, evening, everybody. Edgar Peacock was the youngest of 4 brothers. He was born in India in February 1893, and he was actually 4th generation family in India. So he was of the, if you like, the middle class who didn't send their children back to England to get educated or go to university. They lived in India and they died in India. So his father worked for the post office, his brothers worked in the railways, and he eventually went into forestry. As you can see there, he was orphaned. 15 years old, his parents died in a cholera epidemic. And then within 6 years, both of his elder brothers were also dead, one in the First World War and one for other reasons. So he really was, from the age of 15, he was brought up by his brothers and by his boarding school. And I think it's important to note really that from this time he sort of withdrew into the forest. He became more comfortable being, if you like, Mowgli-esque in the forest with the animals. When he left school, he went to the Dehradun Forestry Research Institute, where he learnt forestry. And then on the 1st of July 1914, he was posted to Burma to start his work. That's an important date because, of course, the First World War started, as far as England was concerned, in August 1914. So Edgar thought he was going to join up and get stuck in. He didn't. He was most put out about it, but his loss was actually World War II's gain, because in the 18 years that followed, He stayed in Burma. He learnt the jungles of Burma. He became an absolute expert in everything that moves around the jungles of Burma. He did take early retirement. For him, he was 38 years old. He took retrenchment and moved to Africa, where he just intended to become a farmer. And then, of course, when the Second World War started, he thought, I'm not going to miss out on this. So despite being too old, he took 5 years off his age and signed up, started off on a sergeant's course. And then within a year or so, he'd become a second lieutenant, sent out to Ceylon initially with the Royal Artillery to set up against an expected invasion by the Japanese there. But he lobbied continuously. Anybody that would listen, he needed to be in Burma. He needed to go to India. That's where he saw his contribution.
I just want to jump in briefly because when we talk on the channel about this campaign, it's framed from the point of view where we say the Far East or the other side of the world, but not if you're already living there. So yes, if you're a lad from London who ends up in, I don't know, the Beds and Hearts Regiment or something, you get posted to Burma via India, it's a completely alien environment to you. But if you're your grandfather, it's home. It's not far at all. England, in a sense, is the far away place. His home, his background, everything about him is this part of the world. So that it all already kind of upsets this idea of it being a campaign that's a long way away. It's all depending on where you're starting.
It is, and you're absolutely right. And there's no indication that Edgar Peacock went to England until he was in his late 20s. And also because Burma and the jungles were home for him, he didn't regard it as an inhospitable environment. In fact, he liked it. And it's interesting to note that whilst the Chindits lost more men to disease than they did to the enemy, Peacock lost absolutely nobody to disease. So,
wow.
Okay, there were fewer of them than the Chindits, but he knew how to stay safe in the jungle.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, so from Ceylon, he was anyone who would listen. He'd say, who knows those jungles better than me? Get me to India. Get me to Burma. He was watching the Burma campaign from afar and really getting quite cross about it. That comes through quite strongly in the records. So he finally, his petitioning must have reached the right ears, and suddenly he was gone. He left his friend Major Poles behind in Ceylon, and he was off to India. He said that he would call for Poles when he was ready, which he did. And it's extraordinary how the life of Poles and Peacock intertwined for the war. So Poles is very much a part of this story as well. But I think it might also just say something a bit more about Peacock's character, in that, how do you extricate someone from a regiment down in Ceylon and get them shifted miles and miles north to India to join you? It took a few months, but he managed it. And that's the sort of forceful character he was. He was a doer. He got stuff done. So when he arrived in India in October 1942, he attended an intelligence course. And then they wanted him to start lecturing on jungle warfare. I think that's the only time in any of his writing that we see that he was a little bit, in the letters to his wife, can I do lecturing? He found out that he could. In his report, they said that he was a lecturer of considerable ability, and that the men liked him. They liked his stories, and they listened to him for 2 hours if he was telling his jungle stories. And so it came to be that he rewrote the training manuals. So military training pamphlet number 9 was just called military training pamphlet number 9, as far as I know, until Peacock got his hands on it and called it the Jungle Book. So Duncan's reference to Mowgli-esque things earlier on, he did like the Jungle Book. He was a big fan of Kipling. So he's rewritten the Jungle Training Book. He's caused some consternation with his controversy, as you can see from that quote there. But he's writing the manual for 14 Army. 14 Army have been kicked out of Burma, of course, and are looking to go back. They're all retraining, regrouping under Slim's leadership. And it would seem that Peacock has had a massive influence on that retraining by not only rewriting training pamphlet number 9, but also, if you go on to the next slide, he was training 7 Indian Division, and it looks like he was training 7 Indian Division for about 2 months. So he had, for as far as we can work out, he had considerable time with them at Attock in India. Of course, 7 Indian Division went on to fight famously in the Battle of the Admin Box. I put James Holland's book up in the corner there because he says that's the turning point. Peacock was he wrote fondly of 7th Division when he left. That's what I was about to just take a little excerpt from the book now and here we go. So he just spent the last 2 months training 7 Indian Division in what his wife called Mowgli Land. With 7 Indian Division, he had tried out old ideas and formulated new ones, and worked out jungle formations and battle techniques for large-scale guerrilla warfare. Edgar had enjoyed his time with 7 Indian Division, but being based in northwest India at Attock, it was no nearer Burma. And that's a quote. It was no nearer Burma. He just wants to get back into Burma. Geraldine wrote that he was most sorry to break his 2 months association with that grand crowd of soldiers to join SOE, but he said goodbye and good luck to his battalions and told them to continue practicing bird calls and animal calls, even though it sounded like a menagerie, as it was a better way of signalling than by blowing whistles.
Just to go back to what you said about getting involved in rewriting the manuals, did he approach Slim and the 14th Army, or were Slim and people in the 14th Army looking for people within their sort of circle who could help them out? Because, as you said, they had been pushed out and they're wanting to go back in with better expertise and better understanding. So was he making himself available, or was he found by then? I'm thinking of kind of the early days of like the SAS and the Parachute Regiment in the UK, where it was a matter of who you knew and knowing that right person. So which was it?
Yeah, uncovering that trail is pretty difficult, and we can only really surmise that it's from being at the intelligence school at Karachi that they noticed his expertise, and it came from there. Whether it came from further up or not, we haven't found any documentary evidence of that. So that's a tricky one to find out.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, 2 months with 7th Division, and then we know, of course, that they went on to win the Battle of the Admin Box. So we don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that Peacock had a role to play in the training of 7th Division, which contributed to that victory in the Admin Box.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Challenging narratives on the Chindwin and beyond. So he's left 7th Division and he's now employed on work that SOE said wasn't real SOE work, but it was absolutely crucial, this period of his time with SOE, and really had an impact on what comes later in 1945. So 1942, the defeat in Burma, there was all the talk of the 5th Column. There was all the talk of the Burma Traitor Army instead of the Burma Independence Army. There was lots of mudslinging going on as the army reorganized, licked their wounds, tried to work out why on earth they'd lost so catastrophically in Burma, and being pushed over onto into India, into Manipur. The pictures there that you've got are from files of Indigenous recruits to SOE, and Peacock was recruiting Bemar or Burman personnel on the Chindwin front. He was working for 20 Division, General Gracie's 20 Division, actually working with 100 Brigade of 20 Division on the Chindwin front. He was running agents, or finding agents and running agents over the Chindwin, and also patrolling aggressively over the river and in the Kabul Valley. So he's recruiting the same people who were thought to be traitors, and he's showing that they're not. But also the idea that all the ethnic groups in Burma were at each other's throats trying to fight each other. He's also showing that he's got in the end 150 riflemen of all ethnicities, and they're all fighting together for the Allied cause. So he's challenging this idea of Weimar treachery and the idea that all the different indigenous peoples of Burma would not fight together or work together. So he's there on the Chindwin front from March 1943 right through to May 1944. He only comes out in May 1944 because he needs to get rushed to hospital because he needed his appendix removed. If you want to see more about all the people who served in SOE, on my website, I've got the Men of SOE Burma page, and I'm trying to put whatever I can find of anyone who served in Burma and SOE on there. And I think I've got about 600 guys on there, and they are from over 20 different ethnicities are represented. Page 153. This is just to sort of push that point about what Peacock was up to. So after the humiliation of 1942, the military looked for excuses to explain their poor performance. Instead of accepting that the Japanese triumphs were mostly due to being both outfought and outgunned, in the bitter recriminations which flew out from India, where British imperial forces licked their wounds, allegations of poor colonial leadership, exaggerated claims of anti-British fifth columns, and the incompetence of the Oriental Mission, that's the Burma, the original SOE mission out in the Far East, the Oriental Mission, these were all asserted. Such internal fractures within the British establishment were probably inevitable, considering that the Japanese had so savagely exposed the weakness of the empire and destroyed British prestige throughout the Far East. And Edgar then had worked for years with the people of Burma, and here he was doing so again and showing everyone what could be done after the humiliation of that retreat. Duncan, anything to add there?
No, of course, he did say in his report after the war that one need only look at his corps of force of personnel to see that they all worked well together, and that perhaps those that took a different view might look at their own prejudices, because they were very, very much a band of brothers, and they looked after each other in his force.
And I'll just ask you a question, Duncan, and you, Rich, is that it seems he's taking the knowledge of the jungle and the countryside and the people to the military world, rather than trying to fit the military doctrine to the environment, in the sense that in 41 and 42 there'd been officers, trained at Sandhurst, the kind of the cliche of going over there and trying to do things, if you like, the British Army way in a different theater. But he's not got the British Army perspective. He's got the how to survive and live in this environment perspective that he's then adapting to the military. Is that kind of a good assessment of what his skill sets were?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. He's also learning, or had learnt, from the local people, because they have the natural skills of moving through the jungle quietly, of hunting, of being able to escape and evade. So he used their natural skills, and he added the military aspect to it, and then presented that to the military. And there was an intention before the Japanese invaded Imphal. There was an intention for him to actually set up a training base where he would be training up to 1,000 people in guerrilla warfare. That never happened because the war moved on, and we'll find out where he went instead. But yes, he was employing the skills that he had in the jungle and with his experience, adding the military aspect to it, and as we found out, to huge success.
And Ian Carr asked what languages he spoke of the local dialects.
Again, a good question. He was fluent in Urdu, which is of course the Indian side of things, but he also spoke Karen. He was, they said, higher standard in Burmese, so not necessarily fluent, but you could get by. But I don't know if you remember who this was that said this, Rich, but somebody said of him that he was the only European that they knew who could speak the Karen language and be indistinguishable from a local.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't remember who said that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
And just what you said. Sorry to interrupt you, Rich, but that and both of you is that, you know, when we've done shows on the channel about the Malaya campaign and things like that, one of the first things the 14th Army or the Commonwealth have to overcome more than anything else is the fear of the environment. Everybody seemed to have this collective fear of, it's not our way of fighting. The jungle is scary, and the Japanese appeared to be masters of it, although that we've kind of not debunked that as such over the years, but that they'd had to learn how to use the environment as well. So it seems to me that your grandfather, Duncan, if nothing else, is just explained to me, oh no, it's, you know, I've lived here for years, it's fine, you just got to know how to do this, you just got to know how to do that. And in many ways the British Army just needs that sort of reassurance, and the fact he's a little bit older can't have hurt as well, that sort of, you know, fatherly arm round the shoulder, yes, it'll be fine, lads, kind of thing. Because I mean, you can't measure that influence, but it seems to me that that's exactly what the army needed at that point in the mid-war.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's really what differentiated him from many of the other perfectly brave and courageous British officers, was that he knew how to survive in the jungle, and he says it in the training manual, the Jungle Book, that you should learn to see the jungle as a friend, rather than some impenetrable morass. That you shouldn't try and cut your way through the jungle, you should just sort of part your way through it. Just little things like that indicate that he didn't see it as a harsh, inhospitable environment, but one which would provide you with everything that you need.
Yeah, good point. So we'll start moving on. So back to both of you.
Yeah, so one more narrative that he challenged very strongly was that in the British Empire, you always get this talk of martial races, and the Bemar weren't seen as a martial race. But 80% of the men that he took from the Chindwin on Operation Character, this big operation that we'll come to shortly in central southern Burma, 80% of the men that he took with him were actually Bemar. And we only have one photo of a special group with all the names. And this is the Ferret Special Group, who was commanded by Poles, who I mentioned earlier. But there's 5 different ethnicities in there. And as you can see, I've put the statistics on there for you. There's 11 Burman, 4 Karen, and 1 each of Kuki, Kachin, and Chin. And this idea that the Bemar weren't exactly a martial race. Well, there's the reports on them, like this one here. I've just put the one on here. Naik Sa Kai, he's sat down on the bottom left with his legs crossed. He joined SOE Christmas Eve 1943. Good and thoroughly staunch NCO in several actions, and is brave and reliable. And there's just little lines like that on the training cards for a lot of the indigenous recruits to SOE, and they're all on the website, as I said. So yeah, we can go on to the next one.
Brilliant. We had just a quick question, another one from Michael Dunn there. I thought Protestant missionaries managed to convert several Quran communities back in the 19th and early 20th centuries. If that was the case, were any missionaries consulted about conditions? So, I mean, that's the kind of, if there were, they are the kind of people I guess your grandfather would have been aware of.
Yeah, a lot of them are Christian. The American Baptists were very active in Karenni, and Stanley Short was a Bible churchman, and he wrote a little book, and he said at the time how most of the population, they're not traitors. They haven't all flocked to the Japanese. They're just not. They're nationalist. They're not. There wasn't this big movement to kick the British out with the Japanese, and they very quickly, in fact, those who did work with the Japanese came over. There was 2 walked out to through Arakan and said, "Oh, we want to help you to kick the Japanese out."
And just another question for you. Sorry, I keep firing away the questions. You've got on there, Rich, that slide there. Then we'll move on. Join the SOE in Christmas Eve 1943. In a brief summary, kind of where is the SOE in this theatre in terms of its it's sort of marks out of 10. I mean, when we talk about, for example, the SOE in France, we know that the earlier periods were beset with problems, and then as the war went on, they kind of got better and better. And Kate Vigers will be on later in the week talking about the SOE elsewhere. But if you kind of have the SOE in all theatres goes through a learning process, doesn't it, Rich, where they have to get to grips with things and new technology and ways of doing things. Sort of. So at the time Peacock joins, where is SOE on its sort of progression in this theatre?
August 1942, the then commander of Burma section, Burma country section, Major Forrester, wrote his appreciation, and he was planning and put into action fairly quickly after getting kicked out of Burma for SOE teams to go around in this giant horseshoe. So for 1943, a lot of 1943, there's the thousands of miles from sort of Arakan around the north through Kachin land, because Operation Dilwyn went in early 1943, down into Karenni, and you've got the agents in the middle as well. There's a hell of a lot going on, and then not all of it is sort of SOE work that's hundreds of miles behind the lines, like Operation Character was in the end. Some of it, like Peacock's work on the Chindwin front, is working quite closely through the lines in a role that normally we would think it was V Force or Z or the Chin levies or the Kachin levies, but SOE's there as well, and that's I'm still uncovering bits and pieces that pulling this story out even more, as we'll see actually in here. There was a great revelation in researching this book, a fantastic revelation which we'll share with you shortly.
Brilliant.
So now we're moving on to we're still in the Upper Chindwin at this point. It is just before the Japanese make their move for Imphal and the invasion of India, and this is something that happened, which actually I think is worthy of a movie in its own right. It's extraordinary rescue, huge bravery and courage. Peacock and 56, I think, of his men are going out for a long 2-week patrol. So they're carrying 2 weeks worth of rations, 60-pound packs, lots of explosives, lots of demolitions, lots of stuff, and they set out, cross the lines into enemy-occupied territory, and they set themselves up on a ridge that they know very well, one side of which overlooks the Kabul Valley and then the British lines, and the other side overlooks the Chindwin River and the Chindwin Valley. And they're watching for the Japanese. They're expecting the Japanese to start moving. Disaster strikes in several ways. One is that their radio never works for one reason or another, so they're completely out of touch with division. Secondly, it's exceptionally hot at that period of time, and thirdly, whilst Captain Gibson, who was a large gentleman who was inspecting a booby trap, he triggered it and blew himself up. So badly injured, though not critically, from his left shoulder down to his left heel, about 20 shrapnel wounds, completely unable to walk. So that rather messes up their patrol. And at the same time, the Japanese are now making their moves, and they can see the gun flashes, they can see the British are retreating, and they don't know where they are because they don't have a radio that works. So they make the decision to bury or destroy any stores they don't need to carry. They make a bamboo litter for the captain, and then they start trying to bring him down off the mountains. 4 people ahead. I'll read a little bit. We're very, very, very lucky in that this is so well written up. There's not just the military citation, which anyone can read in the National Archives. We've got a contemporary diary entry from Captain Poles, and we have the letters which my grandfather wrote to his wife. So we know about this in great detail. I'm just going to read a short extract from Eustace Poles's diary, which really gives the story some weight. It's the section advance guard with 4 men with dars cutting away for John's litter. Next, the litter itself carried by 6 men, and in the rear, the rest of the force supplying relief at the litter and guarding our rear. Edgar in a very bad way, heat exhaustion extreme. In spite of this, he keeps ahead with the advance guard and is continually checking up on the men and generally organising. A wonderful example of the will driving a sick body. I made a strong gruel from the remains of our very depleted rations, and I think this did Major Peacock and Johnson good. We camped near water below the Pagan Tong, but progress for the day was about 1 mile an hour. So they carried on doing this for 3 days, and they eventually managed to get down onto a road and towards the U River. At this point, it became clear that the men were too fatigued to carry the wounded captain any further, and they decided that they were going to have to hide him in the jungle with 4 days' worth of rations and go on their own to try and find out where on earth the British had got to, because they still didn't know how far the British had retreated. This they did, really not expecting to see Captain Gibson alive again. They did eventually find a platoon of Gurkhas up on a ridge. The Gurkhas took them in and drove them back to the headquarters, where everybody but Peacock stayed. Peacock got 10 hours sleep, got up, got another platoon of Gurkhas, went back down the road through the enemy lines a second time. They found Captain Gibson alive. They picked him up and they carried him a third time through the lines. So 3 times within 24 hours, blatantly passing through the Japanese lines and back to safety, back to headquarters, where he went to hospital. He recovered. He went back into the war. He fought in Malaya and, in fact, won himself an MC in later actions. General Douglas Gracie, you can see him up on the screen there, and you've probably already read the quote in the balloon. He was a great supporter of Peacock's. They both liked each other very well, and there's a wonderful bit in the book where these guys couldn't get enough to eat. They were so hungry after what they'd done. General Gracie provided them with breakfast and then a second breakfast, which he insisted on cooking them himself.
Wow.
And yes, as you can see, he's just saying that Peacock, if Peacock was mad, then that's the sort of madness he wants. An extraordinary rescue. Peacock got an immediate award of a military cross for that, because the superiors knew exactly what he was doing.
And this is when I'm thinking of anything I've ever read about any of the units in that part of the country. So no matter how well you think you're reading a map, finding the same trail, finding the same track, recognizing the same tree and things like that's where clearly he's just, well, as you said, he's obviously not afraid of the jungle, even though he was weary, he was tired, the jungle doesn't scare him, and he just obviously had this built-in quality of just being able to find his way and around in it. And it's, I said, everybody watching this can think of accounts of entire companies getting lost, 200 yards away from each other, in whether it's in New Guinea for the Australians or whether it's in Burma. This is an unforgiving environment where navigation's not easy. And yeah, he goes back and finds this guy and brings him back. Incredible. Yeah,
no, you're right. I mean, it was lucky. He spent 3 years in that exact area when he was in the forestry service, so he knew it anyway. And secondly, if anybody can find a copy of the Jungle Book handbook, it's worth reading, because at one point he talks about how easy it is to get lost in the jungle, and he says, climb a tree and look out, find out where you are. So he's not a wizard. He just knew how to control.
It's skills. It's not magic. Yeah, it's skill set, and confidence as well. Well, what an amazing story. So moving on, Imphal coming up.
Yeah. Well, this was the major revolution. This was the historian's moment for me that had me jumping in my seat with excitement. We knew from some of my previous work that SOE was represented at the Battle of Imphal through the Indian Field Broadcasting Unit. So we knew that there was propaganda units there hurling their sheets of paper in old condensed milk tins into the Japanese trenches, asking them to surrender, and send up their loudspeakers, and with 7 or 8 Koreans talking to them in colloquial Japanese to try and induce them to surrender. What we didn't know was that there was a company-sized force of SOE who actually fought actively in the Battle of Imphal. So after the rescue of Gibson, P-Force joined 100 Brigade again in the Pelel area. They had a defensive box, but they didn't. It's not Peacock style. He didn't want to stay sat in a defensive box waiting for the Japanese to attack. He wanted to go out, so they went out in the jungle. They were doing ambush patrols. They're doing intelligence patrols. This information comes from the family records of the man you can see photographed there. That's Major Eustace Pixie Poles. And just a little bit from he's got a little notebook diary left behind. And it didn't really make much sense at first, but then it all sort of jigsaw pieces fell into place with looking at all the different sources and things, and we can work out exactly what was going on. So it's little bits like this which I thought I'd share that were just wonderful to discover and read. Really, really the pleasure of being an historian, I suppose. 26th of April 44. Will you kindly supply anti-mosquito cream for my force? Strength 108. As we are employed on advanced ambushes, it is essential we do not use a powerful smelling kind of cream. 2IC Captain Royal Artillery Poles. And I like his other one as well. All ranks are rum drinkers. We have many pipe smokers and would be glad of a little tobacco if and when a supply is available.
Yeah. The mundanities of jungle life, yeah. Not smelling mosquito cream or anti-mosquito cream and a bit of rum. Good stuff. Yeah. Well, you're convincing me of his importance, so we'll move on.
Okay, yeah. So they're there. As I said, Peacock got pulled out for his appendectomy, and the rest stayed until the end of May, and then they're pulled out. But while they're on all this P-Force work, this is where I hand over Duncan for perfecting new techniques.
Well, this what you can see on the screen there comes from Peacock's post-war report, but it was ordered or asked for by HQ, the army, and what Peacock did was he developed the use of explosives in an aggressive way. And it worked incredibly well. Douglas Gracie, and others thought that really these techniques should be learnt and kept alive for future generations. Very simple. It had to be simple because you're asking it to be used by guerrillas who really don't have necessarily any education. So every member of the group would be carrying a 3-pound gammon grenade. Out of not a gammon grenade, it is a Mills grenade, out of which you've taken the working parts and you've put a 3-foot explosive fuse in. Other members of the group would also be carrying cord techs and pull switches and other cords. And then, as you can see in the diagram, you lay these grenades, bury them down at the side of the path, about 10 feet apart, and you can have 120 feet of it. And you hide the operator will hide away from the grenades with a pull switch, and once the object, be it a people or transport, have walked into the trap area, then the trap is sprung. And it was extremely useful. They did lose 1 or 2 people through accidents, but as he says in his report, it was about 50 to 1. They would strike the enemy at that rate. So it worked incredibly well, and he thought, and many other people thought, that it was something that was simple to use but incredibly effective.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Yeah.
Just to interject there, it says ME25 on there, so just so people know what ME25 is. ME25 is a jungle warfare school down in Ceylon, and and that's where all the men of P-Force had gone after they got pulled out of Chindwin and before they went on Operation Character. And so these techniques were all taught to the instructors down there and then passed on to other teams to use. So there's actually a report which you can find on my website by Lieutenant Joseph Marlam about how he went out and had fantastic results with this use of explosives on Hyena Group of Operation Character.
Brilliant stuff.
Okay, winning over the army. Yeah, SOE wasn't really liked. Slim and Wavell had both had some experience of SOE in the Middle East. Didn't really think that they'd conducted themselves brilliantly. They thought there was just a drain of resources for no return. Career soldiers didn't like them because, well, if you look at Peacock, he's gone from a sergeant to a lieutenant colonel within sort of 4.5 years. You know, to get to lieutenant colonel normally take about 20 years if you're a career soldier. So people don't really like that. Resources were scarce, particularly in this theatre. We know that they were bottom of the pile. And there was lots of talk of actually closing SOE down, closing down the India mission, because they didn't think that they were doing anything much for the war effort. It took an extraordinary meeting to convince Slim in December 44 that a lot of the intelligence he was getting was actually coming from SOE and not from OSS, the American OSS. And a big part of winning over the army and the confidence of the army in SOE that they could materially contribute to a campaign to retake Burma came from Peacock's operations on the Chindwin, and he clearly had General Gracie on his side. You know, General Gracie's even cooked that breakfast for him and Pulse. So I mean, we're not saying that he's the only influence, but we think that he had a huge contribution in convincing the army that SOE had something to offer. SOE wasn't closed down. There's still massive arguments that go on through December 1944, even after that meeting with Slim, through to right on the eve of launching Operation Character and also the teams of Operation Nation. Mountbatten actually has to step in the end and tell ALSI to accept that SOE are going. And that's come straight through the chain of command and then back down again to General Lee saying, no, they're going. So it was quite a close run thing that OSS didn't take over and SOE got closed down. So winning over the army was extremely important, because if they hadn't, and if Slim hadn't accepted, then what happened next may not have happened next. And this is where the massive contribution of Peacock comes in.
Brilliant. Excellent.
Okay, so Operation Character. In the end, there were 12,000 recruits on Operation Character. Operation Character is in the Karenni Hills. It's launched on the 23rd of February 1945. And Slim decided that it would be good to have whatever, when it exceeded all his expectations, but to have whatever SOE could do on his left flank, as he made that dash for Rangoon in Operation Extended Capital, to protect that left flank. Let's get SOE in there. Projections were far out because it did go up to 12,000 recruits in the end. They thought they might get 2,000-3,000 Karen guerrilla fighters, but they flocked to the cause when they knew that the Allies were coming back. And again, that Peacock was massively instrumental here. Had a big fight with the staff planners in Calcutta, and finally got his way. And 3 special groups went on to the same DZ to convince the Karen that they were back and that they weren't going to disappear again, like the Chindits had, and that they wouldn't need to fear any more Japanese reprisals, which they'd seen a lot of, particularly if we know the Major Seagram story. So he's in on the 23rd. He's moved off to his area of operations, so that's quite a big trek through to his area of operations, which is in central the central part of Operation Character, with the all-important road from Morchi to Tongu. He found Sasiso, 7,500 foot peak, where he made his base, and he rapidly recruited and trained, hastily trained, a load of levies, and was poised and ready for offensive operations, which actually started a little bit before Slim gave the order, because they had to fight the Japanese off when they came for them up on Sasiso at the end of March. But ready to go when Slim gave the order on about the 12th of April, and employing all those new explosive and demolitions techniques that we just saw, there was a tangible strategic impact on the Second Burma campaign, because the Otter Group, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Peacock, promoted Lieutenant Colonel in March 1945, they prevented the Japanese from regrouping at Tongu and blocking 14 armies' advance on Rangoon. For this, he was awarded the bar to his MC. But this is a real tangible impact on the campaign. They have done something really sort of worthwhile. They're not just blown up a few trucks. They have prevented a division regrouping on Tongu and allowed the tanks of 14 Army to zoom through first, leaving 90.
This is connecting with Jack Boucher's show Thunder Run a few weeks ago, because those campaigns in 45 were pretty damn ambitious. It was, as Jack made the case there, one of the best examples of combined arms the British Army ever did. But there's an element of daring. The further you push columns of armor and infantry into the heartland, the more your flanks are exposed. So this is part of the story. It's that contextual idea, is that this flanking maneuver that you're talking about, this holding one side of it is important, but easy to lose sight of when you're thinking about the tanks kind of chomping at the bit at the front there, that there are these other defensively offensive parts of the operation on the sides that are incredibly important, but yeah, say easy to overlook. Well,
12,000 recruits, you've got that's a division.
And it's a division of people who know the country. It's a division of people who are absolutely, the perfect ones for that environment. Yeah.
Totally at home at where they are, and really hammering the Japanese. So immediate award to the MC there in recognition of that vital contribution to extended capital.
We got a great question, Rich, from Scott Grimwood about, did Peacock use the first air commandos for insertion and resupply? Because we did a show with Monique a few weeks ago about the importance of that aspect of supply from the air. So SOE in the field, road, truck, train, by sky? How
357, principally 357 squadron, but there was 3 special duty squadrons allocated to SOE, and Terence O'Brien's Moonlight War is a great insight to that squadron leader. He actually flew Peacock in, so he features quite nicely in the book, because he's got some observations of Peacock which are quite interesting.
Great.
Okay,
it's a good book.
Thank you. Brilliant. On we go.
Okay, so Richard's already really described the mission for Operation Character. It was hugely ambitious. So basically, as you can see, 6,500 to 7,000 square miles. It basically ran from the Thai-Siam border northwards, about 150 miles, and then westwards it ran all the way to the main north-south road railway lowlands. So it was all that mountainous jungle area from 150 miles in north-south length to, oh crikey, about 80 miles, I think, as the crow flies, perhaps east-west. Now, initially, it was the Japanese 15th Division were coming southwards, retreating back south, and their orders were to get to Taungu to regroup to stop the British. And the only way really for them to do that was to take a road which initially went north to south, and then turned abruptly westwards and ran through the Karen Territory mountains west to Taungu. And it was this road, this area, that SOE were instructed to operate on. Through various different reasons, cock-ups, difficulties, two or three of the other groups weren't really in place in time. So it really fell to Peacock, who was taking the central area astride this road to stop the Japanese. And as we've said, he did manage to do that. They blew bridges, they ambushed, they did these cortex traps, and over the period of that was one section of character. Once that had happened and the British had moved on through Tanggu, then the Japanese were basically trying to escape into Siam to get away, and SOE's mission then turned to mopping them up and getting rid of them. In the end, you can see the numbers. They're absolutely extraordinary numbers. The 12,000 guerrillas, 130,000 British troops accounted for just short of 12,000 Japanese, and a further 11,000 surrendered. And that's a cautious number, because they only counted what they absolutely knew to be the case. Ones that were lost in the jungle just never got counted. At one point, the SOE in Operation Character were accounting for more of the enemy than the entire army, which is an extraordinary figure. It's about 538 to 1 if you work it out. It's amazing. And as we recently said, they were completely dependent on air supply of food and weaponry. And they were starving, because there wasn't much food to go around towards the end, and it had a major impact on their ability to operate. I don't know, Richard.
Sorry to interrupt you. When we've done shows in the past about the Chindits, things like that, and it came up in the sidebar earlier, the minute you go up country, there's the risks of malaria and all the other things that you get there. I'm assuming, given that he's using a lot of people from the area and he's experienced himself, that he is getting fewer of those casualties to illness than regular army units. Would that be? Is that fair? Am I off the mark there?
No, you're right. I mean, as I said earlier on, he didn't lose any troops to disease as such. With dysentery, I'm thinking of. They did get malaria. Peacock had malaria intermittently throughout his whole life, but somehow they managed to operate around it. They didn't have to evacuate people. They carried on through. As I say, it's possibly unfair to make a direct comparison with the Chindits, because there you had thousands and thousands of people marching through in possibly unsanitary conditions, and Peacock was working much more closely with the land. But nevertheless, it is striking that his men managed to operate really without becoming ill.
I think it just has to come down to a certain amount of expertise and just what we were saying earlier, just knowledge and confidence. And
how to keep yourself safe and how to eat properly. I was just going to hand over to Richard about the air supply, because again, it was something that in their reports, all the commanders from Character paid huge tribute to the efforts of the Air Force and the resupply from India.
Yeah, the RAF, the accolades pouring through all of the commanders' reports. And we uncovered some more bits and pieces for this book about how the Daxon libs of 357, 358, they would come to do a drop on Sasiso. It's a 7,500 foot mountain peak, and in their reports they say what a difficult drop it was. They never knew whether it was going to be shrouded in cloud or not, so they'd have a look. If they couldn't get down under the cloud, they'd go and try and drop the supplies to another group. They'd come back, and they were actually spending enough time over the target hoping that the cloud would just suddenly clear, like it did on occasion, because they knew how desperate they were for supply, that they weren't actually making it all the way back to their original base. They were having to stop and refuel at Cox's Bazar, for example. because they were running the risk of running out of fuel they knew they needed to get those supplies in. So later on, you've got Spitfires and Lysanders doing absolutely amazing work, even doing 3 drops of ammunition into battles, and making the difference there. So the RAF really do need a big shout out.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh well, point 10, legacy.
Yeah, so Duncan to start this one.
Yeah, I mean, for some years, from about 2015, for a few years, I was a trustee of a British charity which provided aid to some of the old soldiers who we've been talking about here today, who Burmese or Karen or local soldiers, if you like, who had operated with the British. And one of the things that was striking was how well remembered those officers from Operation Character and some of the other operations were. And my grandfather's name came up time and time again. So even, 70 years after the war, they still remembered him. And they, of course, also remembered Major Seagram, who's arguably more famous amongst the Karen because of how he lived with them for so long. And Richard and I both went to Rangoon in 2017 when there was a plaque laid in Rangoon Cathedral for Major Seagram, and that's the plaque, and you can see in the centre picture there, the man there is actually Hugh Seagram's nephew, Michael Seagram. And again, many of the old Karen came down to participate in that. The other small point is my grandfather's local second in command was a fellow called Major Saw Butler, who also won an MC and a DSO. Incredible man. And such was the respect between Peacock and Butler that Major Butler named his firstborn son Edgar after Edgar Peacock. And I had the privilege of meeting him in just February this year.
Wow.
So that's my 2 little things for now.
I just wanted to say the middle picture where the unveiling of the plaque is there. That's actually the church where Edgar and Geraldine got married in April 1924. So there was some, it's just some symbiosis of coming back to things there with all of this. So that was really nice. When I first started researching SOE in Burma, of course, you got to read everything that's been done out there. And Professor Richard Aldrich had done some work he'd written an article about Maverick SOE going back to Burma to help the Karen in their struggle. But in his book Intelligence and the War Against Japan, he asserted that it was in Burma that SOE had its most successful military operations. So I like to think that we've built on that and taken Professor Aldrich's work further. And then there's people who have taken our work a little bit further as well, Duncan.
Yes. Many people probably would have heard of Rob Lyman. Dr. Robert Lyman is a prolific author and historian. Slim's official biographer. He was kind enough to agree to write a review of the book or write an endorsement for the book. And I just read it to you because I think it's extraordinary, and I'm very, very grateful to him for writing it. So he says about the book, this remarkable and timely book is the story of a man who Major General Douglas Gracie described as a prince amongst guerrilla leaders. This description perfectly encapsulates the extraordinary achievements of Colonel Edgar Peacock, the man who raised, trained, and deployed the SOE teams that brought about the greatest Special Forces triumph of the Burma campaign, if not the war. While the Chindwin expeditions in 1943 and 1944 are well known and much lauded, the dramatic success of Operation Character in March and April 1945 are almost entirely unknown. Yet Character brought about a degree of strategic effect that astonished the Allies and confounded the Japanese. It was this operation that led to the capture of Taungoo and the subsequent abandonment by the Japanese of Rangoon and the resulting defeat of the Japanese in Burma. Peacock was the man who planned and delivered this triumph, training and employing 12,000 Karen levies with his 130 SOE operatives. He brought about one of the greatest special force triumphs of the war, and the story is not known as a scandal. This book, for the first time, reveals to us Britain's greatest SOE commander.
Wow, good old Dr. Rob Lyman there. Yeah, well, if he said it, I'm going to go with that, because Rob's been a guest on the channel several times, and when Rob speaks, we all listen. So fantastic stuff. And people are saying in the sidebar how much they're learning. Couple of questions for you that came in there. Well, firstly, Rick Green is paying you a compliment, Rich. He found your work helpful in putting together his show on World War II TV. Ian T made the comment that he thinks some commanding officers got sacked for not making sure their troops were taking their anti-malaria drugs. So there were issues with how to treat and how to look after and prevent disease in that theatre, and some divisions and units were better at it than others. So Ian's reminding us of that. But the question from Gina there, were any of the SOE operatives caught and tortured by the Japanese? Gina is asking Rich.
Directly connected with character, we've got one example. A levy was captured at some point before June, because in June he was coerced into leading the Japanese in a second attack on Peacock's base on Sosiso. They were successful in taking a platoon position, and Sergeant Charlesworth was killed in that. When Peacock's men retook the position 10 days later, the levy that they'd forced to guide them up there, he'd been beheaded, and his body was just laying there with his head some distance from it. Yes, and others were captured in other operations as well. But I don't know of any others on character other than when Major Turrell crossed the Salween to try and tell the Japanese that the war was over and that they should all surrender, and they took him prisoner and slapped him up a bit, and they killed one of the levies that he went with.
Okay, well, thanks for answering that one. And my last question to both of you, and maybe especially Rich, is when I've had people like Rob Lyman on and Jack Bausch and others, you know, we talk about this idea that the Burma campaign is still referred to as a forgotten campaign, and there are obviously people like yourselves helping us learn about this campaign that is perhaps overlooked compared to Market Garden or Normandy, other things. But the revolution, it seems to me, is the bringing in of the other nations, the other languages. I mean, we've talked a lot on this channel about the increasing number of historians coming from places like Thailand and Taiwan and Myanmar, although that's a difficult place right now, and China, to tell these stories from that different point of view, because the books I grew up with were written by the British officers of the Gurkhas. They were written by the British commanders. It seems that, you know, with your work, just identifying some of these faces, Rich, we are on an era where we are getting more voices than just the white commanders. Do you think there'll be more inroads in that future?
I think that's a perfect segue for my book that I published not too long ago there. This one, Serving the Empire. This is... Duncan mentioned the charity that he was working with, Help for Forgotten Allies. This is an oral history. We had Karen interviewers interviewing Karen veterans in Karen, and then we had a Karen who speaks English translate it. So in oral history terms, it's really important that you've got that consistency of language and things aren't getting lost. So that is several interviews through the years, starting with Lieutenant Colonel retired Royal Marine Sam Pope. Started in the late 90s, and I was given the transcripts to do something with, and that's the result. So there's some really good accounts. That's all from the Karen point of view in there. So that was a really exciting project. work on.
Well, perhaps you can come on and talk about that in a future show. But it's important that we are bridging those gaps, and it's the internet is a lot of help in that regard. And I follow Rob Lyman's trips over to different parts of the world where he is meeting people from different museums and different resources, and Google Translate and all those things that we use now as invaluable. So another plug by the look of there, Rich. Yeah,
this one is written by a Kachin about Zhao Jun, and Zhao Jun absolutely pivotal to Operation Dilwyn in the north. Really, really important. So that's just a tiny pamphlet really that's available on Amazon. But again, that's just all the Kachin point of view, and it's got a nice little bit of information in there. So.
And finally, I mean, I can see in your face, Duncan, the pride you have reading those accounts about your grandfather and his contribution. And it's always, I mean, we can see objectively he was very important to the world and to the war, but subjectively he's still your grandfather as well. He's still that family figure. So I'm assuming that you're passing on what he did to your next family, next generations. It's good to know that there's a book that you'll be able to pass down, so that the next people will be able to understand what he did. So that's so thank you for all of it, for all of you, or both of you, being part of this.
Thank you.
Well,
it's great.
Well, I think there we are. We will leave it at that. So, Rich, Duncan, it's been fantastic talking to you. Kate Vigers is coming on later in the week talking about SOE in other parts of the world. Tomorrow, we're off to Guernsey, our 10 facts about Guernsey. Lots more shows coming up. Phantom Fleet on Wednesday. We got a show about the American infantry, prisoners of war after the Ardennes. So lots more stuff. So click like and subscribe. Buy my guests' books so they write more. That's the trick there. So the link to the book is in the description below. But in the meantime, this is Paul Woodhouse for World War II TV saying, enjoy the rest of your Monday. I will see you all again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.